Joining me now is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, who is a doctor extraordinaire, and of course, he is in high demand across the country at this time when we're trying to bring a conversation to what's going on in our nation, especially when it comes to radical Islam. He's the founder of American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, thank you for joining us, and welcome back to the CL Bryant Show. How are you doing, my friend?
Good. It's great to be with you, CL. Thanks for having me.
Well, Doc, it's always great to be on with you. We're about to run into here in the next 2 minutes up on the break, but then I want you to stay with me through the break, and we'll come back to you. But I want to start the conversation by asking you, or Doctor, what is it that we as Americans are missing about how we should approach the radical Islamic question or the radical Islamic situation in our country? We need to hear from you, a champion of bringing clarity to this. How would you answer that question? How would you approach it?
Yeah, I would say we need to stop simply addressing it after each attack. We need to have a consistent program of engagement and realize that terrorism, these militants, are simply the tip of the iceberg. They're a symptom. They don't spontaneously combust from a normal person into a radical. There's a continuum there, and that continuum includes misogyny, anti-Semitism, anti-Westernism, anti-secularism. So there's some ideological components that our community needs to address, and I think the American the American citizenry needs to begin to engage on these issues and abandon the political correctness, but also realize that Muslims are the primary solution to this, and we need to engage them both positively and critically.
There was a time when we had healthy relationships in this country with each other, period, as Americans. Zuhdi, when did this type of climate began to present itself? Was it at 9/12, or did it start before then? Give us some clarity. You have about 1 minute to answer that one.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. The issue of addressing Islamic history, if you will, and now this week with the Christian Reformation being at its 500-year history with Martin Luther in 1517. I think people need to understand that's where Islam is today. But in America, the use of Muslim issues for identity politics, for, partisan hackery, if you will, that's sort of an evolution of just one more issue that has evolved out of the Obama era of identity politics. And I think that's the primary problem. And Trump's issue now with the mainstream media, basically, since he's gone after the swamp and the establishment, has just exaggerated that exponentially.
We're on with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, founder of American Islamic Forum for Democracy. We're going to return with him after this brief break. Don't you go anywhere. I want to speak with him about the politics of identity that is prevalent in this country. You're on with CL, Coast to Coast, Red State Talk Radio. We'll be right back. CL back with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, president, founder of American Islamic Forum for Democracy, someone who has been able to bring clarity to the discussion here in America that we all must talk about together. And Zuhdi, when we look at pastors, imams, rabbis in this country, I travel it a lot, coast to coast, at least once a month, every month. I crisscross the nation, and I'm not seeing this conversation being had very often, or if it is had, it's had in a very awkward type of way. You have this conversation, I know, with the forum all the time. What are we also doing wrong, or why is it not so easy for clergymen to take on this conversation? What would you say?
I think because the American penchant is because we were founded on religious liberty, because religious freedom is the first freedom, to really lift that up always in conversations and take your dialogue for granted, which is to say that, well, the Muslims we're talking to must be Jeffersonian Democrats because they're here. They came to America, so therefore they must have become Jeffersonian Democrats upon coming here. And I think that sort of belies the reality, which is there's a lot of smart, wonderful people that come here. Folks like my family came here for political reasons, seeking freedom, but there are many here just simply for economic reasons, and they're trained in professions, but they're not really liberally educated to understand post-Enlightenment thought, reformation, ideas that are part of Americanism. So what happens with many of the discussions in interfaith communities is that we don't really challenge Muslims to understand what they believe if Muslims are a majority. And that's why a lot of the radicalization process happens with what I call this global Islamist insurgency, which are Muslim communities and leaders that live here, but yet they're trying to bring forth an evangelical theopolitical movement. It's not just evangelizing their own faith, but evangelizing their political movement that they believe is superior to an American movement. And, that's really, I would ask clerics and priests and rabbis and others to begin to look at America's founding. We sort of have an ahistorical conversation when it comes to Islam, and we forget that America was founded on fighting against theocracy, and yet when we talk to Muslims, we think they're somehow not theocratic, even though that's sort of still where they are historically.
So it's the theocracy of their mindset, Dr. Jasser, that many times causes the lack of or the slowfulness in assimilating. Is that what you're saying to us? The assimilation process is hindered because and our understanding of it is hindered because we don't see how theocratic Muslims are. Is that what you're saying? Clarify a little bit more for us.
Yeah, I mean, they bring with them, when they talk about assimilation, we're looking at cultural music and things like that, but nobody really challenges what is their worldview. That's the issue, is that I've never found an Islamist. This is why we need to stop it at immigration and other things, is most of the time Islamists that believe in a worldview that the world's divided into the land of Islam and the land of war, that is still the primary worldview of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all these huge governments that are autocratic. While the Arab movements, the Arab awakening movements may have tried to shed the cloak of dictatorship, they still haven't changed what is the worldview of Islam, and that needs reform. So I think assimilation is not going to be the way in which we counter their worldview, but rather to begin to engage the youth in what it means to be American, because the only antidote to the Islamist dominance of worldview is the Americanism, the American exceptionalism. And the Islamists, there's an Islamist at Brookings Institute, Shadi Hamid, wrote a book on Islamic exceptionalism. I've been trying to debate him for years, because I think as much as he condemns terrorism, condemns ISIS and things like that, his view that Islam is an exceptional global worldview is in direct contradiction to American exceptionalism and the advancement of freedom.
Gotta have you back so we can talk further about the statement or the word that you use often. And folks, you see Zuhdi on Fox and throughout the media world all the time, hear him on all types of radio shows. Islamist. I want you to come back with me as soon as we can arrange it, and let's talk about Islamist. That is something that is also escaping our conversation. Zuhdi, we have about a minute and a half. Share with us, how do you think the president is handling this so far? What should he do? What's his strong points? What are his shortcomings when it comes to dealing with this topic?
Well, I think in the short term, with the bandwidth he's been able to devote to this so important issue, he's been great as far as giving the DOD the freedom to target ISIS. We finally almost have them decimated. I think he's reestablished some of the 20th century relations we have with Sunni governments in Egypt and Saudi Arabia to rebalance the Middle East and not acquiesce to Iran. The long-term, though, these short-term allies are not going to be our long-term allies, and I hope he can convene that commission on radical Islam he promised he would do in the campaign, because ultimately these long-term solutions, if you're going to defeat jihad, defeat the Islamic State idea, these allies that he just shored up with Saudi Arabia and Egypt are not going to be in for that, and we have to figure out a long-term strategy. So that's, I think, the next step.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on with me, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. How do people get in touch with you and your work? How do they look you up and get a glimpse into your work?
Our website is aifdemocracy.org, AIF as in formdemocracy.org. I'm on Twitter at Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, DrZuhdijasser. And actually, by the way, CL, I'll be at websummit.com next week. It's the largest, it's sort of the Davos for IT world, and I'll be leading a panel on media and radicalism in Europe. It'll be in Portugal. It'll be fascinating.
That is fascinating. Zuhdi, we'll have you back real soon. God bless you and keep you, man. I'll talk to you real soon. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Thanks.